The crisis that is escalating nationwide when it comes to the COVID-19 epidemic. Some states are seeing pediatric cases surge and vaccine rates dip, and hospitalizations continue. Now, President Biden will deliver a major speech later today addressing all of these issues. He's expected to lay out his administration's revamped plan to fight COVID-19 and boost vaccine rates across the country. This comes as infections spike among kids as millions return to school. More than 1 in 4 new COVID cases are now among children. The alarming increase has pushed some school districts to take action, especially in Los Angeles, where all schools will require COVID vaccines for all eligible students. President Biden will also highlight those concerns in today's speech.
So for more on this, let's bring in Nancy Cordes. She's following the very latest from the White House. So a new phase of this pandemic. Nancy, perhaps we need a new approach. It seems like that's what the president is putting forward. What do we know about the president's plan and how it might be different than what we've heard from the administration before?
Good morning, Anne-Marie. Good morning, Vlad. Well, we know a lot about the goals that he's going to address in his speech. What we don't know as much about is the nitty-gritty, the details, whether we're going to see major policy shifts, things we haven't seen over the past year and a half. It looks like they're trying not to steal the president's thunder, so they've told us very little about what he's going to say, although they have told us what the 6-point plan looks like in an overarching way. It's going to deal with increasing testing, requiring masks, doing everything the federal government can to keep schools open, protecting the very fragile economic recovery, improving care for those who do have COVID-19, and of course, making sure that more of the unvaccinated get vaccinated. So the question is, what more can the federal government do that it hasn't already been doing? We know that the Biden White House has been very reluctant to go ahead and issue a federal vaccine mandate, and we don't anticipate that the president is going to do that today. But he may look for ways to incentivize local and state governments or major companies to get their populations, their workers, or even customers vaccinated instead. So we'll be watching for that. One thing that the administration does have a lot of sway over is the federal workforce. We know that a couple of months ago, the president announced that he would be requiring all federal employees to either get the vaccine or get tested regularly. Could he be looking to make those requirements more stringent, perhaps? We'll be watching to see if he has anything to say about that. And also for more clarification, guys, on boosters. Who exactly should get a booster, when they'll be able to, whether it would just be Pfizer, when they can get the Moderna booster as well. All those details we'll be watching for when the president speaks later today.
Nancy, as you recall, when President Biden was candidate Biden, and even throughout the course of his inauguration speech, he did sort of send a signal to Americans that we were facing essentially a battle. We were on wartime footing when it came to this pandemic. You know, he hasn't used that language much in recent months, but do we expect that he will again sort of sound that clarion call to all Americans that we need to be thinking about this pandemic much in the same way that we would any kind of military challenge we've faced over the years?
Absolutely. One thing he likes to talk about is the fact that it is every American's patriotic duty to get vaccinated and to do what they can to protect others from this virus, whether it is getting the vaccine or masking while indoors. He will obviously be addressing the mask debate in schools, and I wouldn't be surprised if he applauds the move that's being considered in Los Angeles to get all students vaccinated. The White House has always questioned, they're big fans of vaccine mandates, but they've always questioned whether the federal government has the legal authority to issue a blanket vaccine mandate. But that doesn't mean that they don't want to do everything they can to use the levers of government to encourage other entities to get people vaccinated. So if there are measures they can take, now that we've seen the polling and the fact that actually vaccine mandates have become more and more popular over time, the White House sees those numbers as well. And so they may be willing to push for for measures that they wouldn't have been comfortable with just a few months ago when it comes to incentivizing companies or state and local governments to get people vaccinated at those levels, if not the federal level.
So, Nancy, the Biden administration is reportedly planning to sue Texas over its new abortion law. It's a really cleverly written law in that the state doesn't enforce it. It gives the power to regular citizens to enforce the law. Right. What do we know about this administration's plans?
Well, because it is such a cleverly written law, Anne-Marie, we know that DOJ is planning to challenge the law. We don't exactly know upon which grounds DOJ is going to challenge the law. It's a novel piece of legislation, and so they are having to do some legal detective work, if you will, to figure out exactly how best to challenge this new Texas law in court. The president has instructed the Department of Justice to do anything it can to push back on Texas. Beyond the Attorney General's office, there are other parts of the federal government, other parts of this administration that are looking for ways that they can try to get around this Texas law, looking into perhaps the possibility that federal health providers located in Texas might be able to provide abortions. They're trying to figure out if that might be a way to get around the law. But this really is a very new and unique situation, Anne-Marie, and you get the sense that they are trying to figure out in real time. They know they want to go after this law. They know they want to send a message to other states that are considering similar laws, but they're still trying to figure out the best way to do it.
Let's switch gears a bit, Nancy. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki confirmed the Biden administration has asked several Trump appointees to resign from various boards. Here's some of what she had to say about this yesterday.
The president's objective is what any president's objective was to ensure you have nominees and people serving on these boards who are qualified to serve on them and who are aligned with your values. I will let others evaluate whether they think Kellyanne Conway and Sean Spicer and others were qualified or not political to serve on these boards. But the president's qualification requirements are not your party registration. They are whether you're qualified to serve and whether you're aligned with the values of this administration.
So Nancy, help our audience understand, because I sort of feel like this is going to be something that is going to be used by people, you know, across the political spectrum to make hay of something. And I just wonder, first of all, do we know when those appointments happened and how long these individuals have served on these boards and what this all really actually means?
Right. So there are tons of boards that the president has the right to appoint individuals to at any point while he's in office. And typically those boards have a set amount of time that people are appointed to them. You know, these boards happen to have to do with the military academies, but there are all kinds of other boards having to do with education and the arts and what have you. And on one hand, yes, it is the right of the president to appoint who he wants to these boards, to remove people if he wants to these boards. In this particular case, these boards having to do with the military academies, people typically aren't stripped of their positions on those boards before their term is up. That is the case on some other high-profile boards, but not on these, and that's why it's gotten so much attention. And you've now got some members like Kellyanne Conway who are saying they will not step down, and so basically daring the Biden administration to do what it says it's going to do, which is to fire them by today if they don't voluntarily step down. The argument that the Biden administration is making is that these are individuals who, in some cases, may not be qualified, in some cases may have perpetuated some of the lies that President Trump told about the election, either agreed with him, stood by, didn't challenge him, and the argument that you've had Psaki and others making is that disqualifies them from holding being a member of prestigious boards like these. But this was always destined to become a political hot potato. And of course, you've got some of these individuals on conservative media arguing that the president is simply doing this to create a distraction from a bunch of bad news that he's had to deal with lately. So we're just going to have to watch and see over the next couple of days if the White House does make good on this threat to fire these individuals from these volunteer boards if they don't step down.
I was wondering where Sean Spicer was, and then when I saw the list, I was like, oh, that's what he's been doing, among other things. Nancy, before we let you go, got to ask you about the latest on Afghanistan, at least some good news. We are hearing that the Taliban is allowing about 200 Americans and other foreigners to leave the country, to fly out of the country. Did President Biden or the White House play a role in this?
We assume that the White House and the State Department did play a role, but they are not copping to how big of a role they played at this time. They are simply saying that, yes, they are involved in ongoing efforts to try to get Americans and other partners out of the country. We know that that process has been incredibly fraught. Now that you're down to perhaps the last 100 or so Americans who actually do want to get out of the country right now. And we know that the Taliban is making it more and more difficult for them to do that. And clearly the administration feels at this point that revealing the extent of its conversations with the Taliban might not be helpful to future efforts to get more Americans out of the country. And so for now, all we know is that that they had a hand in this, but we just don't know how much they did or what they promised to get these people out.
Nancy Cordes, thank you so much.
You're welcome.